There is a manuscript that most churches never mention from the pulpit, an ancient text that survived fires, persecution, and entire centuries of deliberate silence, remaining hidden as if someone had decided it should never reach the hands of ordinary people. In this manuscript, Jesus does not appear merely announcing spiritual messages or preaching to the crowds, but teaching in detailed and careful ways how to awaken a healing force that already exists within the human body itself. And according to this teaching, the first place where this force manifests is in the hands. This is not presented as a fantasy, nor as a metaphor created to inspire, but as something described in ancient Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945. Texts that reveal an image of Jesus very different from the one that has been taught for centuries in Sunday schools and in the most familiar versions of Christianity. In these writings, Jesus speaks about frequencies, about centers of energy spread throughout the body, and about the power that every human being carries in the palms of their hands, as if there were a hidden channel there that most people have learned to ignore. Perhaps the most important question is not whether all of this is true or not, but why so many of these ideas remained hidden for so long. How many times have you felt a strange and unexplained warmth in your hands, or placed your hand over a pain, over your chest, over your head, and noticed that something seemed to change? Even though you could not explain it from an early age, most people have been taught to call these experiences coincidence, imagination, or merely a passing sensation. But these ancient texts claim that Jesus gave another name to this, calling it the pneumatic seal, the mark of those who carry within themselves a spark that does not belong to this material world. It is important to pay attention to what comes next, not as someone simply watching another video before going to sleep, but as someone who has finally found words to explain something they have felt their entire life and never managed to understand. What is being shared did not arise from modern self-help books, but from texts that remained buried in the desert for almost 2,000 years, written by people who believed they were preserving the original teachings of Jesus before they were altered, censored, or transformed. If you're reading this now, perhaps the Gnostics would say that it is not by chance. They used a specific word to describe people who felt this inner calling, pneumatikoi, those who carry the divine breath within themselves. According to this view, understanding what Jesus taught about the hands means understanding something profound about the body itself and about consciousness. To understand why these ideas, it is necessary to return to one of the most decisive moments in the history of Christianity. In the year 325, Emperor Constantine gathered bishops from different regions of the Roman Empire in the city of Nicaea with the official purpose of unifying Christian doctrine. But according to this narrative, there was also another goal: to decide which texts would be accepted as sacred and which would be rejected, forgotten, or destroyed. Among the excluded texts were precisely those that spoke about a healing ability existing within every human being, not as a miracle reserved for a chosen few, but as a natural possibility that could be awakened through consciousness. The Gnostics believed this, and because of that belief, many communities were persecuted, entire libraries were burned, and spiritual teachers lost their lives. They were not seen as a threat because they possessed weapons or armies, but because they carried an idea dangerous to any system of power. The idea that every person can directly access what they seek without depending on intermediaries. After all, if every human being can heal, understand, and awaken on their own, then what would be the role of the institutions that control this knowledge? This question has crossed centuries and continues to provoke discomfort even today. When people think about healing in the Gospels, they usually imagine Jesus touching someone who is sick and saying, "Your faith has healed you." But the Gnostic texts describe something even deeper. In them, Jesus does not appear performing isolated miracles merely to prove his divine authority. He appears teaching a method, a kind of spiritual technology, a path that anyone could learn, practice, and apply both to themselves and to others. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says that light is present in all things, declaring that if someone splits a piece of wood, they will find that light there, and if they lift a stone, it will be beneath it. When this idea is applied to the human body, its meaning becomes even more astonishing. Because if divine light is in everything, then it is also present within us, especially in the places through which this force flows most intensely. According to Gnostic teachings, the palms of the hands are one of those places. Within Gnostic cosmology, there is also the figure of the archons, entities associated with the control of the material world. According to these texts, the archons did not create the divine spark that exists within each person, because that spark would come from a higher reality called the Pleroma, the divine fullness, the original source of all light. The Pleroma would be the state of perfection and completeness from which the true human essence originated before becoming trapped in matter. The archons would be servants of the demiurge, an entity described as the creator of the physical world, but not of the true spirit. According to this view, the demiurge shaped an imperfect world in order to keep people separated from their divine origin. Because the moment someone awakens to the power that already exists within themselves, they cease to be easily controlled and stop feeding the system that depends on ignorance in order to survive. As strange as this may seem at first, there are traditions all over the world that speak of something similar. Traditional Chinese medicine describes energy meridians that end at the fingertips. The Hindu tradition speaks of small energy centers in the palms of the hands. Ancient practices of the laying on of hands appear in different cultures and religions, separated by oceans, centuries, and continents, yet all arriving at a similar idea. The hands are channels, portals through which something invisible can be transmitted. In Gnostic texts, especially in writings such as the Pistis Sophia, Jesus speaks of divine light circulating through the human body and being directed by conscious intention towards specific places, although he did not use the word energy, because that concept did not exist in the same way at that time. The description comes very close to what some people today would call bioenergy, an invisible force that can be felt, directed, and used. The most surprising detail is that in these texts, Jesus never claims that only he possesses this ability. On the contrary, he teaches that anyone who awakens the inner spark can access the same power. The Gospel of Philip states that Christ is not merely a name, but a state of consciousness, and that the one who receives this anointing becomes like the one who granted it. This idea completely changes the traditional way of seeing Jesus, because it suggests that the power demonstrated by him was not reserved exclusively for a single person, but existed latently within all human beings. According to the Gnostics, the hands are the first places where this awakening begins to be noticed. Even before any more obvious inner transformation takes place, the hands begin to give signs, an unexpected warmth, tingling in the fingertips, a sensation of pulsation, heaviness, or vibration during prayer, meditation, or when the hands are placed near another person's body. These signs were seen not as something insignificant, but as the beginning of remembering who the person truly is. The texts of Nag Hammadi called this process anamnesis, a word that means remembrance. It is not about learning something new, but about remembering something very ancient, something that was always within you, even before you were born, before you forgot, before you were taught to believe that you were only matter, routine, and survival. Anamnesis would be the opposite of forgetting. It would be the moment when the veil is finally torn away and the person realizes that they have always been greater than they were told, deeper than they imagined, and more connected to the divine than they ever dared to believe. And according to this view, everything around us seems to have been built precisely to prevent this awakening, keeping people tired, distracted, busy, and unable to stop for a few moments and feel what exists within them. But according to these ancient traditions, there is a moment when this control weakens. The night, the Gnostics call this moment the hour of the lamp, the time when silence takes over, distractions disappear, and the outer world loses its power. It is in the stillness of the night, when the phone no longer rings, when obligations come to an end, and when everything around begins to slow down, that a person is finally able to perceive what has always been there. If you have ever felt, in the silence of your room, that there is something within you trying to speak, something ancient, deep, and impossible to explain. These texts would say that you should not ignore that feeling, because it is older than your name, older than your story, and perhaps it comes from a place that no system, no fear, and no distraction can ever reach. The first Gnostic Christians believed this so deeply that they practiced these teachings in secret, hidden in caves, basements, and isolated places, far from the eyes of the empire. Many of these teachings almost disappeared forever, but they did not disappear completely because someone chose to preserve them, copying them word by word onto papyri, hidden in the desert of Egypt, risking their own lives so that one day this message could be found again. When Muhammad Ali al-Salman found the jars hidden in Nag Hammadi, he did not imagine that he was returning to the world a body of knowledge that, according to this narrative, had been buried so it would never be found again. A collection of teachings that the archons had tried to erase from human memory, and that contained, among many other revelations, detailed instructions on how to awaken the healing force that lives in the hands of every person. Before anything else, it is important to understand that what will be described is not presented as a magical ritual or as a meaningless superstition, but as a process that, within the Gnostic tradition, has its own logic, based on the way the so-called pneumatic energy moves through the body. Each step would have a specific purpose. Each detail would be important, and nothing would happen automatically. According to these teachings, everything depends on the intention with which the practice is carried out, because it does not respond to empty curiosity or to the desire to prove that nothing works, but only to a sincere willingness, similar to the reverence with which the first disciples received what they believed to be the words of Jesus. The first step was called by the Gnostics the preparation of the vessel. The body was seen as a container, a living vessel meant to carry within itself the spark of the Pleroma. But over the years, this vessel would become covered by layers of interference created by fear, guilt, sadness, anger, worries, and judgments absorbed throughout life. According to this view, all of these emotions would leave marks that block the circulation of the inner light, forming what the texts describe as seals of shadow. For this reason, before trying to awaken any force in the hands, it would be necessary to prepare this vessel and clear the path through which the energy must pass. The instruction is to sit in silence, keeping the spine straight and aligned, not because there is a perfect or mandatory position, but because the spine was considered in these teachings to be the great river through which the light of the Pleroma would descend to the extremities of the body. If this river were blocked or misaligned, the energy would not fully reach the hands. With the eyes closed, the person should breathe deeply through the nose, hold the breath for a few moments, and slowly release it through the mouth, repeating this movement several times until the body begins to slow down. On the final breath, they should imagine that all accumulated tension, all heavy thoughts, all fears, and all inner pain are leaving the body like a dark mist that finally dissolves into the air. The Gnostics believed that imagination was not an unimportant fantasy, but the language through which the spark communicates with the material world. So visualizing something was, for them, a way of reorganizing the inner field itself. After this preparation came what they called the awakening of the seals. With the eyes still closed, the person should turn all attention toward their own hands, without trying to do anything immediately. Simply noticing that they are there, feeling their weight resting on the legs, the temperature of the skin, and the contact with the air. Gradually, they should notice whether there is any different sensation, perhaps a slight warmth, perhaps tingling, perhaps an almost imperceptible pulse. The important thing is not to force anything, not to create expectations, and simply to observe, because according to the Pistis Sophia, the simple act of observation is already the first command that consciousness sends in order to awaken the spark. Next, both hands should be slowly raised and placed in front of one another, keeping a small, empty space between the palms. The instruction is not to let them touch, but to leave a few inches of distance and pay attention to what happens in that invisible space between them. Many people describe the sensation as if there was something there, a slight resistance, a kind of invisible field, sometimes like a warm sphere, sometimes similar to a gentle magnet that both attracts and repels at the same time. In the Gnostic texts, this sensation was called tangible light, the first physical manifestation of the energy of the Pleroma within the material world. After this came the stage considered most sacred, called the laying on of the seal, keeping the hands filled with this sensation. The person should slowly bring them toward the center of the chest, without immediately touching the skin, letting them hover a few inches in front of the heart area. According to the Gnostics, the heart was the throne of the spark, the place where the light of the Pleroma remains most intensely present within the human being. Directing the hands toward this point would be like feeding an inner flame with the very breath of life, while the hands remain before the chest. The instruction is to breathe normally and simply observe what happens. Some people report a sensation of warmth that begins in the heart and spreads throughout the entire body. Others feel old emotions suddenly emerging, as if something hidden for a long time were finally coming to the surface. Some feel the urge to cry without fully understanding why. Within these teachings, tears would not be seen as weakness or confusion, but as a sign that the seals of shadow are beginning to dissolve and that the spark is, little by little, recognizing itself. According to this tradition, after passing through the heart, the hands would remain for several minutes, charged with an intensified healing frequency. Anything touched in this state, as long as it is accompanied by sincere intention, would receive this energy. The Gospel of Philip describes this moment as the living anointing, a state in which the person becomes, even if only for a short time, a bridge between the Pleroma and the material world, between what is invisible and what can be felt. In these texts, Jesus did this continuously, not because he was essentially different from other human beings, but because he kept this channel permanently open. The difference, according to them, was not in the nature of Jesus, but in the fact that he lived in a constant state of connection. And the message being transmitted was that any person who carries the pneumatic spark could learn to open this same path within themselves. If there is any pain in the body, the practice instructs that after warming the hands near the heart, they should be brought to the place where the pain is felt. It is not necessary to press or force anything. It is enough to rest the palms on the area, or hold them a few inches above it. While the person imagines that the light awakened in the heart is slowly flowing through the hands until it reaches that point, the most important instruction is not to demand immediate results. Because according to the Gnostics, the spark does not respond to anxiety or attempts at control, but to silence, trust, and surrender. They said that light does not heal because it fights against darkness, but because darkness cannot remain where light is present. Thus, the person would not be waging a battle against pain, but bringing presence to a place that was once empty. With repetition, they claimed, this practice would become stronger and stronger. The inner channel would gradually open, the sensations in the hands would become clearer, and the connection with the spark would grow more stable. The Gnostics compared this process to the sunrise. At first, there's only a faint light, almost imperceptible. Then the light becomes stronger, revealing forms that were once hidden, until finally the sun appears completely and the darkness disappears without ever needing to be fought. If, upon hearing these words, you notice some warmth, vibration, or different sensation in your hands, these texts would say that this is a sign that the spark never disappeared. It merely remained asleep, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Perhaps the most astonishing part of this entire story is that these teachings almost never reached us. For centuries, the texts remained buried, the teachers were silenced, and the Gnostic communities nearly vanished. For almost 2,000 years, this knowledge remained hidden in clay jars beneath the soil of Egypt until it unexpectedly resurfaced and reached ordinary people. Not in a secret chamber or through a closed society, but in the silence of an ordinary night. When someone finds these words at the exact moment they needed them, the Gnostics did not believe in coincidences. They believed in synchronicity, in the idea that there's an invisible connection between what happens within us and the events of the outer world. So if these teachings have reached you, perhaps they would say that it is because some deep part of your own consciousness called them. And then only one choice remains. It is possible to ignore all of this, return to routine, Let distractions once again occupy every space, and continue seeing your hands as nothing more than hands. But it is also possible to decide that tonight is different, that it marks the beginning of something new, and to experience for yourself what, according to these texts, has always existed within you. If the second option feels right, simply begin in silence, without haste, feeling your hands, breathing deeply, and allowing the flame in the heart to be nourished. Perhaps the change will be subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But according to the ancient Gnostics, once the light begins to awaken, it never fully goes back to sleep.